This is a continuation of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror, by Robert E. Howard, comprising parts 19 and 20. Part 19. In the Hall of the Dead. Conan moved cautiously in the direction of the light he had seen, his ear cocked over his shoulder, but there was no further sound of pursuit, though he felt the darkness pregnant with sentient life. The glow was not stationary. It moved, bobbing grotesquely along. Then he saw the source. The tunnel he was traversing crossed another, wider corridor, some distance ahead of him, and along this latter tunnel filed a bizarre procession. 4 tall, gaunt men in black, hooded robes, leaning on staffs. The leader held a torch above his head, a torch that burned with a curious, steady glow. Like phantoms, they passed across his limited range of vision and vanished, with only a fading glow to tell of their passing. Their appearance was indescribably eldritch. They were not Stygians, not like anything Conan had ever seen. He doubted if they were even humans. They were like black ghosts, stalking ghoulishly along the haunted tunnels. But his position could be no more desperate than it was. Before the inhuman feet behind him could resume their slithering advance at the fading of the distant illumination, Conan was running down the corridor. He plunged into the other tunnel and saw, far down it, small in the distance, the weird procession moving in the glowing sphere. He stole noiselessly after them, then shrank suddenly back against the wall as he saw them halt and cluster together as if conferring on some matter. They turned as if to retrace their steps, and he slipped into the nearest archway. Groping in the darkness to which he had become so accustomed that he could all but see through it, he discovered that the tunnel did not run straight, but meandered, and he fell back beyond the first turn, so that the light of the strangers should not fall on him as they passed. But as he stood there, he was aware of a low hum of sound from somewhere behind him, like the murmur of human voices. Moving down the corridor in that direction, he confirmed his first suspicion. Abandoning his original intention of following the ghoulish travelers to whatever destination might be theirs, he set out in the direction of the voices. Presently he saw a glint of light ahead of him, and turning into the corridor from which it issued, saw a broad arch filled with a dim glow at the other end. On his left, a narrow stone stair went upward, and instinctive caution prompted him to turn and mount the stair. The voices he heard were coming from beyond the flame-filled arch. The sounds fell away beneath him as he climbed, and presently he came out through a low arched door into a vast open space glowing with a weird radiance. He was standing on a shadowy gallery from which he looked down into a broad, dim-lit hall of colossal proportions. It was a hall of the dead, which few ever see but the silent priests of Stygia. Along the black walls rose tier above tier of carven, painted sarcophagi. Each stood in a niche in the dusky stone, and the tiers mounted up and up to be lost in the gloom above. Thousands of carven masks stared impassively down upon the group in the midst of the hall, rendered futile and insignificant by that vast array of the dead. Of this group, 10 were priests, and though they had discarded their masks, Conan knew they were the priests he had accompanied to the pyramid. They stood before a tall, hawk-faced man beside a black altar on which lay a mummy in rotting swathings, and the altar seemed to stand in the heart of a living fire which pulsed and shimmered, dripping flakes of quivering golden flame on the black stones about it. This dazzling glow emanated from a great red jewel which lay upon the altar, and in the reflection of which the faces of the priests looked ashy and corpse-like. As he looked, Conan felt the pressure of all the weary leagues and the weary nights and days of his long quest, and he trembled with the mad urge to rush among those silent priests, clear his way with mighty blows of naked steel, and grasp the red gem with passion-taut fingers. But he gripped himself with iron control and crouched down in the shadow of the stone balustrade. A glance showed him that a stair led down into the hall from the gallery, hugging the wall and half hidden in the shadows. He glared into the dimness of the vast place, seeking other priests or votaries, but saw only the group about the altar. In that great emptiness, the voice of the man beside the altar sounded hollow and ghostly. And so, the word came southward. The night wind whispered it. The ravens croaked of it as they flew, and the grim bats told it to the owls and the serpents that lurk in hoary ruins. Werewolf and vampire knew, and the ebon-bodied demons that prowl by night. The sleeping night of the world stirred and shook its heavy mane, and there began a throbbing of drums in deep darkness, and the echoes of far weird cries frightened men who walked by dusk. for the heart of Ahriman had come again into the world to fulfill its cryptic destiny. Ask me not how I, Thuthothmes of Kami and the night, heard the word before Thoth Amon, who calls himself prince of all wizards. There are secrets not meet for such ears even as yours, and Thoth Amon is not the only lord of the Black Ring. I knew, and I went to meet the heart which came southward. It was like a magnet which drew me, unerringly. From death to death it came, riding on a river of human blood. Blood feeds it, blood draws it. Its power is greatest when there is blood on the hands that grasp it, when it is wrested by slaughter from its holder. Wherever it gleams, blood is spilt and kingdoms totter, and the forces of nature are put in turmoil. And here I stand, the master of the heart, and have summoned you to come secretly, who are faithful to me, to share in the black kingdom that shall be. Tonight you shall witness the breaking of Thoth Amon's chains which enslave us, and the birth of empire. Who am I, even I, Thuthothmes, to know what powers lurk and dream in those crimson deeps? It holds secrets forgotten for 3,000 years, but I shall learn. These shall tell me. He waved his hand toward the silent shapes that lined the hall. See how they sleep, staring through their carven masks. Kings, queens, generals, priests, wizards, the dynasties and the nobility of Stygia for 10,000 years. The touch of the heart will awaken them from their long slumber. Long, long the heart throbbed and pulsed in ancient Stygia. Here was its home in the centuries before it journeyed to Acheron. The ancients knew its full power, and they will tell me when by its magic I restore them to life to labor for me. I will rouse them, will waken them, will learn their forgotten wisdom, the knowledge locked in those withered skulls. By the lore of the dead we shall enslave the living. I, kings and generals and wizards of old, shall be our helpers and our slaves. Who shall stand before us? Look, this dried, shriveled thing on the altar was once Thoth Makri, a high priest of Set, who died 3,000 years ago. He was an adept of the Black Ring. He knew of the heart. He will tell us of its powers. Lifting the great jewel, the speaker laid it on the withered breast of the mummy and lifted his hand as he began an incantation. But the incantation was never finished. With his hand lifted and his lips parted, he froze, glaring past his acolytes, and they wheeled to stare in the direction in which he was looking. Through the black arch of a door, 4 gaunt, black-robed shapes had filed into the great hall. Their faces were dim yellow ovals in the shadow of their hoods. "Who are you?" ejaculated Thuthothmes in a voice as pregnant with danger as the hiss of a cobra. "Are you mad to invade the holy shrine of Set?" The tallest of the strangers spoke, and his voice was toneless as a Khitan temple bell. "We follow Conan of Aquilonia." "He is not here," answered Thuthothmes, shaking back his mantle from his right hand with a curious menacing gesture, like a panther unsheathing his talons. "You lie. He is in this temple. We tracked him from a corpse behind the bronze door of the outer portal through a maze of corridors. We were following his devious trail when we became aware of this conclave. We go now to take it up again. But first, give us the heart of Ahriman." "Death is the portion of madmen," murmured Thuthothmes, moving nearer the speaker. His priests closed in on cat-like feet, but the strangers did not appear to heed. "Who can look upon it without desire?" said the Khitan. "In Kaitai we have heard of it. It will give us power over the people which cast us out. Glory and wonder dream in its crimson deeps. Give it to us before we slay you." A fierce cry rang out as a priest leaped with a flicker of steel. Before he could strike, a scaly staff licked out and touched his breast, and he fell as a dead man falls. In an instant, the mummies were staring down on a scene of blood and horror. Curved knives flashed and crimsoned, snaky staffs licked in and out, and whenever they touched a man, that man screamed and died. At the first stroke, Conan had bounded up and was racing down the stairs. He caught only glimpses of that brief, fiendish fight, saw men swaying, locked in battle and streaming blood, saw one Khitan, fairly hacked to pieces, yet still on his feet and dealing death, when Thuthothmes smote him on the breast with his open empty hand, and he dropped dead, though naked steel had not been enough to destroy his uncanny vitality. By the time Conan's hurtling feet left the stair, the fight was all but over. 3 of the Khitans were down, slashed and cut to ribbons and disemboweled, but of the Stygians only Thuthothmes remained on his feet. He rushed at the remaining Khitan, his empty hand lifted like a weapon, and that hand was black as that of a Negro. But, Before he could strike, the staff in the tall Khitan's hand licked out, seeming to elongate itself as the yellow man thrust. The point touched the bosom of Thutmose, and he staggered. Again and yet again, the staff licked out, and Thutmose reeled and fell dead, his features blotted out in a rush of blackness that made the whole of him the same hue as his enchanted hand. The Khitan turned toward the jewel that burned on the breast of the mummy, but Conan was before him. In a tense stillness, the two faced each other, amid that shambles, with the carven mummies staring down upon them. "Far have I followed you, O King of Aquilonia," said the Khitan calmly. "Down the long river and over the mountains, across Poitain and Zingara and through the hills of Argos and down the coast. Not easily did we pick up your trail from Tarantia, for the priests of Asura are crafty. We lost it in Zingara, but we found your helmet in the forest below the border hills, where you had fought with the ghouls of the forests. Almost we lost the trail again tonight among these labyrinths." Conan reflected that he had been fortunate in returning from the vampire's chamber by another route than that by which he had been led to it. Otherwise, he would have run full into these yellow fiends instead of sighting them from afar as they smelled out his spoor like human bloodhounds, with whatever uncanny gift was theirs. The Khitan shook his head slightly, as if reading his mind. "That is meaningless. The long trail ends here." "Why have you hounded me?" demanded Conan, poised to move in any direction with the celerity of a hair trigger. "It was a debt to pay," answered the Khitan. "To you who are about to die, I will not withhold knowledge. We were vassals of the king of Aquilonia, Valerius. Long we served him. But of that service we are free now, my brothers by death, and I by the fulfillment of obligation. I shall return to Aquilonia with two hearts, for myself, the heart of Ahriman, for Valerius, the heart of Conan. A kiss of the staff that was cut from the living tree of death." The staff licked out like the dart of a viper, but the slash of Conan's knife was quicker. The staff fell in writhing halves. There was another flicker of the keen steel, like a jet of lightning, and the head of the Khitan rolled to the floor. Conan wheeled and extended his hand toward the jewel. Then he shrank back, his hair bristling, his blood congealing icily. For no longer a withered brown thing lay on the altar. The jewel shimmered on the full, arching breast of a naked, living man who lay among the moldering bandages. Living? Conan could not decide. The eyes were like dark, murky glass under which shone inhuman, somber fires. Slowly the man rose, taking the jewel in his hand. He towered beside the altar, dusky, naked, with a face like a carven image. Mutely he extended his hand toward Conan, with the jewel throbbing like a living heart within it. Conan took it, with an eerie sensation of receiving gifts from the hand of the dead. He somehow realized that the proper incantations had not been made, the conjurement had not been completed, life had not been fully restored to his corpse. "Who are you?" demanded the Cimmerian. The answer came in a toneless monotone, like the dripping of water from stalactites in subterranean caverns. "I was Thothmekri. I am dead." "Well, lead me out of this accursed temple, will you?" Conan requested, his flesh crawling. With measured mechanical steps, the dead man moved toward a black arch. Conan followed him. A glance back showed him once again the vast, shadowy hall with its tiers of sarcophagi. The dead men sprawled about the altar. The head of the Khitan he had slain stared sightless up at the sweeping shadows. The glow of the jewel illuminated the black tunnels like an ensorcelled lamp, dripping golden fire. Once Conan caught a glimpse of ivory flesh in the shadows, believed he saw the vampire that was Akivasha, shrinking back from the glow of the jewel, and with her, other less human shapes scuttled or shambled into the darkness. The dead man strode straight on, looking neither to right nor left, his pace as changeless as the tramp of doom. Cold sweat gathered thick on Conan's flesh. Icy doubts assailed him. How could he know that this terrible figure out of the past was leading him to freedom? But he knew that, left to himself, he could never untangle this bewitched maze of corridors and tunnels. He followed his awful guide through blackness that loomed before and behind them, and was filled with skulking shapes of horror and lunacy that cringed from the blinding glow of the heart. Then the bronze doorway was before him, and Conan felt the night wind blowing across the desert, and saw the stars, and the starlit desert across which streamed the great black shadow of the pyramid. Thothmekri pointed silently into the desert, and then turned and stalked soundlessly back in the darkness. Conan stared after that silent figure that receded into the blackness on soundless, inexorable feet, as one that moves to a known and inevitable doom, or returns to everlasting sleep. With a curse, the Cimmerian leaped from the doorway and fled into the desert as if pursued by demons. He did not look back toward the pyramid, or toward the black towers of Kimi looming dimly across the sands. He headed southward toward the coast, and he ran as a man runs in ungovernable panic. The violent exertion shook his brain free of black cobwebs. The clean desert wind blew the nightmares from his soul, and his revulsion changed to a wild tide of exultation before the desert gave way to a tangle of swampy growth, through which he saw the black water lying before him and the venturer at anchor. He plunged through the undergrowth, hip-deep in the marshes, dived headlong into the deep water, heedless of sharks or crocodiles, and swam to the galley, and was clambering up the chain onto the deck, dripping and exultant, before the watch saw him. "Awake, you dogs!" roared Conan, knocking aside the spear the startled lookout thrust at his breast. "Heave up the anchor, lay to the doors, give that fisherman a helmet full of gold and put him ashore. Dawn will soon be breaking, and before sunrise we must be racing for the nearest port of Zingara." He whirled about his head the great jewel, which threw off splashes of light that spotted the deck with golden fire. Part 20. Out of the dust shall Acheron arise. Winter had passed from Aquilonia. Leaves sprang out on the limbs of trees, and the fresh grass smiled to the touch of the warm southern breezes. But many a field lay idle and empty. Many a charred heap of ashes marked the spot where proud villas or prosperous towns had stood. Wolves prowled openly along the grass-grown highways, and bands of gaunt, masterless men slunk through the forests. Only in Tarantia was feasting and wealth and pageantry. Valerius ruled like one touched with madness. Even many of the barons who had welcomed his return cried out at last against him. His tax-gatherers crushed rich and poor alike. The wealth of a looted kingdom poured into Tarantia, which became less like the capital of a realm than the garrison of conquerors in a conquered land. Its merchants waxed rich, but it was a precarious prosperity, for none knew when he might be accused of treason on a trumped-up charge, and his property confiscated, himself cast into prison or brought to the bloody block. Valerius made no attempt to conciliate his subjects. He maintained himself by means of the Nemedian soldiery and by desperate mercenaries. He knew himself to be a puppet of Amalric. He knew that he ruled only on the sufferance of the Nemedian. He knew that he could never hope to unite Aquilonia under his rule and cast off the yoke of his masters, for the outland provinces would resist him to the last drop of blood, and for that matter, the Nemedians would cast him from his throne if he made any attempt to consolidate his kingdom. He was caught in his own vice. The gall of defeated pride corroded his soul, and he threw himself into a reign of debauchery, as one who lives from day to day, without thought or care for tomorrow. Yet there was subtlety in his madness, so deep that not even Amalric guessed it. Perhaps the wild, chaotic years of wandering as an exile had bred in him a bitterness beyond common conception. Perhaps his loathing of his present position increased this bitterness to a kind of madness. At any event, he lived with one desire, to cause the ruin of all who associated with him. He knew that his rule would be over the instant he had served Amalric's purpose. He knew, too, that so long as he continued to oppress his native kingdom, the Nemedian would suffer him to reign, for Amalric wished to crush Aquilonia into ultimate submission, to destroy its last shred of independence, and then at last to seize it himself, rebuild it after his own fashion with his vast wealth, and use its men and natural resources to wrest the crown of Nemedia from Tarascus. For the throne of an emperor was Amalric's ultimate ambition, and Valerius knew it. Valerius did not know whether Tarascus suspected this, but he knew that the king of Nemedia approved of his ruthless course. Tarascus hated Aquilonia with a hate born of old wars. He desired only the destruction of the western kingdom, and Valerius intended to ruin the country so utterly that not even Amalric's wealth could ever rebuild it. He hated the Baron quite as much as he hated the Aquilonians, and hoped only to live to see the day when Aquilonia lay in utter ruin, and Tarascus and Amalric were locked in hopeless civil war that would as completely destroy Nemedia. He believed that the conquest of the still defiant provinces of Gunderland and Poitin and the Bessonian marches would mark his end as king. He would then have served Amalric's purpose, and could be discarded, So he delayed the conquest of these provinces, confining his activities to objectless raids and forays, meeting Amalric's urges for action with all sorts of plausible objections and postponements. His life was a series of feasts and wild debauches. He filled his palace with the fairest girls of the kingdom, willing or unwilling. He blasphemed the gods and sprawled drunken on the floor of the banquet hall, wearing the golden crown, and staining his royal purple robes with the wine he spilled. In gusts of bloodlust, he festooned the gallows in the market square with dangling corpses, glutted the axes of the headsmen, and sent his Nemedian horsemen thundering through the land, pillaging and burning. Driven to madness, the land was in a constant upheaval of frantic revolt, savagely suppressed. Valerius plundered and raped and looted and destroyed until even Amalric protested, warning him that he would beggar the kingdom beyond repair, not knowing that such was his fixed determination. But while in both Aquilonia and Nemedia men talked of the madness of the king, in Nemedia men talked much of Zaltotin, the masked one. Yet few saw him on the streets of Belvaris. Men said he spent much time in the hills, in curious conclaves with surviving remnants of an old race, dark, silent folk who claimed descent from an ancient kingdom. Men whispered of drums beating far up in the dreaming hills, of fires glowing in the darkness, and strange chantings borne on the winds, chantings and rituals forgotten centuries ago, except as meaningless formulas mumbled beside mountain hearths in villages whose inhabitants differed strangely from the people of the valleys. The reason for these conclaves none knew, unless it was Orestes, who frequently accompanied the Pythonian, and on whose countenance a haggard shadow was growing. But in the full flood of spring, a sudden whisper passed over the sinking kingdom that woke the land to eager life. It came like a murmurous wind drifting up from the south, waking men sunk in the apathy of despair. Yet, how it first came, none could truly say. Some spoke of a strange, grim old woman who came down from the mountains with her hair flowing in the wind, and a great gray wolf following her like a dog. Others whispered of the priests of Asura, who stole like furtive phantoms from Gunderland to the marches of Poitin, and to the forest villages of the Bosonians. However the word came, revolt ran like a flame along the borders. Outlying Nemedian garrisons were stormed and put to the sword. Foraging parties were cut to pieces. The West was up in arms, and there was a different air about the rising, a fierce resolution, an inspired wrath rather than the frantic despair that had motivated the preceding revolts. It was not only the common people. Barons were fortifying their castles and hurling defiance at the governors of the provinces. Bands of Bosonians were seen moving along the edges of the marches, stocky, resolute men in brigandines and steel caps, with longbows in their hands. From the inert stagnation of dissolution and ruin, the realm was suddenly alive, vibrant and dangerous. So Amalric sent in haste for Tarascus, who came with an army. In the royal palace in Tarantia, the two kings and Amalric discussed the rising. They had not sent for Zaltotin, immersed in his cryptic studies in the Nemedian hills. Not since that bloody day in the valley of the Valkia had they called upon him for aid of his magic, and he had drawn apart, communing but little with them, apparently indifferent to their intrigues. Nor had they sent for Orestes, but he came, and he was white as spume, blown before the storm. He stood in the gold-domed chamber where the kings held conclave, and they beheld in amazement his haggard stare, the fear they had never guessed the mind of Orestes could hold. "You are weary, Orestes," said Amalric. "Sit upon this divan, and I will have a slave fetch you wine. You have ridden hard." Orestes waved aside the invitation. "I have killed 3 horses on the road from Belvaris. I cannot drink wine, I cannot rest, until I have said what I have to say." He paced back and forth, as if some inner fire would not let him stand motionless, and halting before his wondering companions. "When we employed the heart of Ahriman to bring a dead man back to life," Orestes said abruptly, "we did not weigh the consequences of tampering in the black dust of the past. The fault is mine, and the sin. We thought only of our ambitions, forgetting what ambitions this man might himself have. And we have loosed a demon upon the earth, a fiend inexplicable to common humanity. I have plumbed deep in evil, but there is a limit to which I, or any man of my race and age, can go. My ancestors were clean men, without any demoniacal taint. It is only I who have sunk into the pits, and I can sin only to the extent of my personal individuality. But behind Zaltotin lie 1,000 centuries of black magic and diabolism, an ancient tradition of evil. He is beyond our conception, not only because he is a wizard himself, but also because he is the son of a race of wizards. I have seen things that have blasted my soul. In the heart of the slumbering hills, I have watched Zaltotin commune with the souls of the damned and invoke the ancient demons of forgotten Acheron. I have seen the accursed descendants of that accursed empire worship him and hail him as their archpriest. I have seen what he plots, and I tell you, it is no less than the restoration of the ancient black grisly kingdom of Acheron. What do you mean? Demanded Amalric. Acheron is dust. There are not enough survivals to make an empire. Not even Zaltotun can reshape the dust of 3,000 years. You know little of his black powers, answered Orestes grimly. I have seen the very hills take on an alien and ancient aspect under the spell of his incantations. I have glimpsed, like shadows behind the realities, the dim shapes and outlines of valleys, forests, mountains, and lakes that are not as they are today, but as they were in that dim yesterday. Have even sensed, rather than glimpsed, the purple towers of forgotten Python, shimmering like figures of mist in the dusk. And in the last conclave to which I accompanied him, understanding of his sorcery came to me at last, while the drums beat and the beast-like worshippers howled with their heads in the dust. I tell you, he would restore Acheron by his magic, by the sorcery of a gigantic blood sacrifice such as the world has never seen. He would enslave the world, and with a deluge of blood wash away the present and restore the past. You are mad, exclaimed Tarascus. Mad? Orestes turned a haggard stare upon him. Can any man see what I have seen and remain wholly sane? Yet I speak the truth. He plots the return of Acheron, with its towers and wizards and kings and horrors, as it was in the long ago. The descendants of Acheron will serve him as a nucleus upon which to build, but it is the blood and the bodies of the people of the world today that will furnish the mortar and the stones for the rebuilding. I cannot tell you how. My own brain reels when I try to understand. But I have seen. Acheron will be Acheron again, and even the hills, the forests, and the rivers will resume their ancient aspect. Why not? If I, with my tiny store of knowledge, could bring to life a man dead 3,000 years, why cannot the greatest wizard of the world bring back to life a kingdom dead 3,000 years? Out of the dust shall Acheron arise at his bidding. How can we thwart him? Asked Tarascus, impressed. There is but one way, answered Orestes. We must steal the heart of Ahriman. But began Tarascus involuntarily, then closed his mouth quickly. None had noticed him, and Orestes was continuing. It is a power that can be used against him. With it in my hands I might defy him. But how shall we steal it? He has it hidden in some secret place, from which not even a Zamorian thief might filch it. I cannot learn its hiding place. If he would only sleep again, the sleep of the Black Lotus. But the last time he slept thus was after the battle of the Valkia, when he was weary because of the great magic he had performed, and the door was locked and bolted, but it swung silently open, and Zaltotin stood before them, calm, tranquil, stroking his patriarchal beard, but the lambent lights of hell flickered in his eyes. I have taught you too much, he said calmly, pointing a finger like an index of doom at Orestes. And before any could move, he had cast a handful of dust on the floor near the feet of the priest, who stood like a man turned to marble. It flamed, smoldered, a blue serpentine of smoke rose and swayed upward about Orestes in a slender spiral, and when it had risen above his shoulders, it curled about his neck with a whipping suddenness like the stroke of a snake. Orestes' scream was choked to a gurgle. His hands flew to his neck, his eyes were distended, his tongue protruded. The smoke was like a blue rope about his neck. Then it faded and was gone, and Orestes slumped to the floor, a dead man. Zaltotun smote his hands together, and two men entered, men often observed accompanying him, small, repulsively dark, with red oblique eyes and pointed rat-like teeth. They did not speak. Lifting the corpse, they bore it away. Dismissing the matter with a wave of his hand, Zaltotin seated himself at the ivory table, about which sat the pale kings. "Why are you in conclave?" he demanded. "The Aquilonians have risen in the west," answered Amalric, recovering from the grisly jolt the death of Orestes had given him. "The fools believe that Conan is alive, and coming at the head of a Poetanian army to reclaim his kingdom. If he had reappeared immediately after Valkia, or if a rumor had been circulated that he lived, the central provinces would not have risen under him. They feared your powers so. But they have become so desperate under Valerius's misrule that they are ready to follow any man who can unite them against us, and prefer sudden death to torture and continual misery. Of course, the tale has lingered stubbornly in the land that Conan was not really slain at Valkia, but not until recently have the masses accepted it. But Pallantides is back from exile in Ophir, swearing that the king was ill in his tent that day, and that a man-at-arms wore his harness, and a squire, who but recently recovered from the stroke of a mace received at Valkia, confirms his tale, or pretends to. An old woman with a pet wolf has wandered up and down the land, proclaiming that King Conan yet lives, and will return someday to reclaim the crown. And of late, the cursed priests of Asura sing the same song. They claim that word has come to them, by some mysterious means, that Conan is returning to reconquer his domain. I cannot catch either her or them. This is, of course, a trick of Trotseros. My spies tell me there is indisputable evidence that the Poetanians are gathering to invade Aquilonia. I believe that Trotsero will bring forward some pretender who he will claim is King Conan. Tarascus laughed, but there was no conviction in his laughter. He surreptitiously felt of a scar beneath his jupon, and remembered ravens that cawed on the trail of a fugitive, remembered the body of his squire, Aridaeus, brought back from the border mountains horribly mangled by a great gray wolf, his terrified soldiers said. But he also remembered a red jewel stolen from a golden chest while a wizard slept, and he said nothing. And Valerius remembered a dying nobleman who gasped out a tale of fear, and he remembered 4 Chaetons who disappeared into the mazes of the south and never returned. But he held his tongue, for hatred and suspicion of his allies ate at him like a worm, and he desired nothing so much as to see both rebels and Nemedians go down locked in the death grip. But Amalric exclaimed, "It is absurd to dream that Conan lives." For answer, Zaltoten cast a roll of parchment on the table. Amalric caught it up, glared at it. From his lips burst a furious, incoherent cry. He read, "To Zaltoten, Grand Fakir of Nemedia, Dog of Acheron, I am returning to my kingdom, and I mean to hang your hide on a bramble, Conan." "A forgery!" exclaimed Amalric. Zaltoten shook his head. "It is genuine. I have compared it with the signature on the royal documents on record in the libraries of the court. None could imitate that bold scrawl." "Then if Conan lives," muttered Amalric, "this uprising will not be like the others, for he is the only man living who can unite the Aquilonians. But," he protested, "this is not like Conan. Why should he put us on our guard with his boasting? One would think that he would strike without warning after the fashion of the barbarians." "We are already warned," pointed out Zaltoten. "Our spies have told us of preparations for war in Poitin. He could not cross the mountains without our knowledge, so he sends me his defiance in characteristic manner." "Why to you?" demanded Valerius. "Why not to me or to Tarascus?" Zaltoten turned his inscrutable gaze upon the king. "Conan is wiser than you," he said at last. "He already knows what you kings have yet to learn, that it is not Tarascus, nor Valerius, no, nor Amalric, but Zaltoten who is the real master of the Western nations." They did not reply. They sat staring at him, assailed by a numbing realization of the truth of his assertion. "There is no road for me but the imperial highway," said Zaltoten. "But first we must crush Conan. I do not know how he escaped me at Belverus, for knowledge of what happened while I lay in the slumber of the Black Lotus is denied me. But he is in the south, gathering an army. It is his last, desperate blow, made possible only by the desperation of the people who have suffered under Valerius. Let them rise. I hold them all in the palm of my hand. We will wait until he moves against us, and then we will crush him once and for all. Then we shall crush Poitain and Gunderland and the stupid Bossonians. After them, Ophir, Argos, Zingara, Koth, all the nations of the world, we shall weld into one vast empire. You shall rule as my satraps, and as my captains shall be greater than kings are now. I am unconquerable, for the heart of Ahriman is hidden where no man can ever wield it against me again." Tarascus averted his gaze, lest Zaltoten read his thoughts. He knew the wizard had not looked into the golden chest with its carven serpents that had seemed to sleep, since he laid the heart therein. Strange as it seemed, Zaltotin did not know that the heart had been stolen. The strange jewel was beyond or outside the ring of his dark wisdom. His uncanny talents did not warn him that the chest was empty. Tarascus did not believe that Zaltotin knew the full extent of Erasti's revelations, for the Pythonian had not mentioned the restoration of Acheron, but only the building of a new earthly empire. Tarascus did not believe that Zaltotin was yet quite sure of his power. If they needed his aid in their ambitions, no less he needed theirs. Magic depended to a certain extent, after all, on sword strokes and lance thrusts. The king read meaning in Amalric's furtive glance. Let the wizard use his arts to help them defeat their most dangerous enemy. Time enough then to turn against him. There might yet be a way to cheat this dark power they had raised. This concludes the 10th part of 12 total of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror, by Robert E. Howard, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.